Many of you may have seen this week that CNN published an actual op-ed by the commanding general of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Valery Zaluzhny. It's a little bit unusual for, especially 2 years into a war, for a commanding general of an army to publish an op-ed, but that's what he did. I think that for the primary reason to show what he thinks are the lessons learned, what's at stake, and what he's still going to need, and especially for an American audience, because he's looking for a lot of our money and a lot of our weapon systems on top of that. And that's not surprising. I don't hold any of that against him. And in fact, we're going to talk about some of the specific things that he's talked about here. But what I want to do is examine what he's talking about, the future of warfare. And we're going to contrast that with somebody that's near and dear to most of your hearts out there. I know a lot of you have seen Doug Macgregor on this show before. Well, I'm going to show you some of the things. I'm going to show you a version of Doug Macgregor that many of you, probably most of you, have never even seen before. You're going to see that the things that he has been saying for decades of time kind of put some of these things that Zaluzhny's saying about the future in a little bit different light, because some of these things, the way he presents them, Zaluzhny, is that this is new and that this is something that they discovered after a couple of years of fighting. And really, if we had listened to Macgregor earlier, if the American government and military had listened earlier, man, things would be a whole lot better for us. And if the Ukrainian army had actually read some of Doug's books and some of the things that he had written earlier, they would have realized that some of these lessons that they have learned over the last 2 years should have been known ahead of time before they even started. And who knows, the outcome could have been different than what we have right now. But let's take a look at that first. And actually, I want to back up a little bit. Many of you know that Doug Macgregor has a lot of combat experience. I've had him on this show before, and I've talked to you about his Desert Storm experience. That's him with one of his crew members there in Desert Storm in front of his tank that saw so much success there. This is another one. Actually, I took this one from my combat vehicle at the Battle of 7-3 Easting on the critical moment of the battle, and that's his command vehicle behind him, and he's in that tank on the front side there. That's actually him in the turret. If you look close, you can see him right there. But what some of you may not know is that Doug is actually a prolific author. And I'm going to show you here in a few minutes some books he's written as far back as 1997, has some really interesting things in light of today's combat that really stand out. But he's also one of the unique people that can see things at the strategic level as well as all the way down at the tactical level. Here, I'm going to show you now a clip of Doug back in 2008 when he was testifying before Congress about what the U.S. should do with Iraq. Now, as you watch this, just imagine how much difference it would have made for America if the U.S. government had listened to him then.
I think any elected official contemplating the commitment of U.S. forces to the survival of a government like Iraq's, a government that already confronts powerful armed opposition inside its own borders, should recognize the potential damage that the government's reliance on U.S. military power would cause its legitimacy. The best strategy for the United States, in my view, is to stay out of Iraq's internal conflict until that is resolved and a new legitimate Iraqi leadership emerges without direct U.S. military support. And finally, an open-ended pledge by the United States government to commit its military establishment to the defense of the Iraqi government in Baghdad against internal enemies on the grounds that the United States is defending, quote-unquote, a democratic system, something that I think is at least misleading, if not fundamentally untrue, seems to me uncomfortably close to the old Soviet notion of defending socialism in Central East Europe inside the Warsaw Pact, which ultimately was an excuse for intervention to prop up unwanted communist regimes in Central and Eastern Europe.
So if we had listened to Doug in 2008 and not kept American soldiers there to defend the Baghdad government, if Obama had not sent them back in again, even after they got out in 2014, again to defend the Baghdad government, folks, they wouldn't be there right now. And as we're making this video today, live right now, there are allegedly B-52s in the air on the way right now to strike targets in Iraq and in Syria in defense of our troops there. If those troops had left and decades before, there wouldn't be any need to defend anybody there. There wouldn't be any Americans dead because they wouldn't have been on the ground there. Let that sink in for just a second. That's how critical some of these things Doug has said in the past could have benefited America. And in this case, some of the things I'm about to show you could have benefited Ukraine. And that is the problem. So that when we talk about ideas going forward, might need to put a little bit more credibility behind what Doug is suggesting here. Now, let's look back at what Zaluzhny is saying, because now let's, real quick, take a look at there. Now, this war has been going on for nearly 2 years now. And Zaluzhny, of course, has been their commanding general ever since the war started. There's been a lot of conflict in recent weeks and months between Zaluzhny and his president, Zelensky. Apparently, according to the Washington Post a couple of days ago, Zaluzhny is about to be fired because there's been so many disagreements about policies and tactics that they've been going on in there. Well, Zaluzhny now has published this op-ed after actually having given an interview to the Economist toward the end of last year, where he admitted that things had not worked out for the offensive. Now that he knows that they are in desperate need of Western and specifically American money and arms and ammunition, so he's publishing this piece here to explain what he's learned and what he needs. Now, one of the things he writes here is that our combat experience, particularly since 2022, is unique. But in the interest of victory, we must constantly find new ways and new capabilities to help us an advantage over the enemy. Perhaps the number one priority here is mastery of an entire arsenal of relatively cheap, modern, and highly effective unmanned aerial vehicles and other technological means. It offers the opportunity to reduce reliance on heavy material in combat missions and an overall conduct of hostilities. It opened up the possibilities of inflicting sudden and massive strikes against critical infrastructure and facilities and communication hubs without deploying expensive missiles or manned aircraft. Now, if you're thinking, okay, that sounds reasonable, I guess, like you said, these unique situations here, but it's not exactly unique. Now, I'm going to show you in a minute ago a couple of books Doug has written. You can check these out if you want. One is Breaking the Failin. That's from 1997, and I'll be sharing with you a clip of how prescient some of those things were. Another one is Margin of Victory. I think Gary had a picture of that one up there in a minute. We'll put that back up in a second. But what I want to show you now is something that Doug wrote close to 7 years ago in the National Interest that directly relates to what Zaluzhny just says there. Now, this is 2017. And Doug wrote, the skies over the future battlefield will be crowded with loitering munitions and unmanned aerial vehicles. Remember, Zaluzhny just said these unique new things, and that's what, after 2 years of war, they have learned. Doug wrote about this 5 years before that war even started, that this is exactly what they should expect to find on future battlefields. These agile cruise missiles are designed to engage in beyond line of sight ground targets with proximity fuses, high explosive warheads. These systems will require airborne or will remain airborne for hours, whether day or night, equipped with high-resolution electro-optical infrared cameras. Enemy operators will locate, surveil, and guide to drone targets on the ground. Now, does that sound like something that was written in 2017 or something that was written like last week? Because Doug has been talking about this forever. He continues on there. If we can put that back up. These loitering missiles are integrated into the enemy strike formations, armed with precision-guided rocket artillery that fires high explosive, incendiary, thermobaric warheads, including submunitions with self-targeting anti-tank, anti-personnel munitions. Warfare as we know it will change. And again, you don't have to learn that after the fact, after 2 years of war. If you had read this before, you'd have known exactly what was coming. And this last part, I think, is very key. Imagine the impact of the aforementioned events on the contemporary Army's thousands of paratroopers and air mobile and truck-mounted infantry. The consequences for gas-guzzling, even upgraded tanks and infantry fighting vehicles designed in the 70s will be no less profound. Without integrated air and missile defenses to protect them from a top attack or their own precision strike capabilities to counter the enemy strikes, the mix of enemy capabilities employed as described will crush them. And that is exactly what has happened. That's what Doug wrote about before, that said this is what's coming. And again, if I didn't even put any context and I just read that, you would think, well, that's what someone is identifying after what has happened after 2 years of war, because the tanks, especially during that offensive that Ukraine launched last summer, all of their tanks and everything else ran into battlefields or ran into minefields. They were hit with drone attacks. Precision artillery is just pounded them. So now Ukraine has gone to infantry-centric attacks. These FPV drones, like you're seeing on the screen right there, those are now ubiquitous on the battlefield, and they're continuing to expand. But folks, that's not new. This should have been foreseen long ago. And now that's going to get us kind of to the next section here of what Zaluzhny wrote. Gary, if you can toss that one back up, number 2. He said the challenge for our armed forces cannot be underestimated. It is to create a completely new state system of technological rearmament, taking everything into account at this moment. We think the creation of such a system could be achieved in 5 months, and our partners are of the same view. That's troubling to me, because if he's, when he says our partners, I assume he's meaning the United States and certainly U.S. and NATO. And if that's what our partners think, that you can create an army on the fly after 2 years of war, when you've suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties, and you think you're going to get something that's new, that they can now actually start winning when you haven't won for 2 years, especially in a maneuver warfare, which is required if you're going to drive out an invading army, that's a problem. Because I can assure you, just from my own personal experience, there is no chance that you can train an army from scratch on the fly while they're engaged in combat operations after hundreds of thousands of casualties, and think in 5 months you're going to get something that's good. Now, you don't even have to take my word for it, because if we look back now to the margin of victory book here, this is one of the key things that Doug writes in here that should have leapt off the page to everybody in our country as well as Ukraine. And he says that each chapter in the book that is here there is a clarion call for the United States to recognize that wars are decided in the decades before they begin, not by the sudden appearance of some new technological silver bullet or the presence of a few strong personalities in the senior rank during a single battle. How effectively national, political, and military leaders adjust to the framework of organization, technology, and human capital to relentless change in society, technology, and world affairs determines the nation state prevails or perishes in defeat. And that happens in the decades, and certainly in the years before combat. And now then, look, this is what Zaluzhny said just a couple of days ago. But this is also, if you read the Washington Post, I believe in early December of last year, where they analyzed why the operations for the offensive operations failed, one of the things that really leapt out to me was that it said that the American senior advisors from the Pentagon actually thought that because they had a little bit of training in Germany and some other NATO places before that operation, that the Ukraine side had a 50-50 shot at getting to the Sea of Azov, which boggles my mind. But that's one of the problems that some of our senior leaders are thinking, even though Doug has been laying this out for years, that's the case. And going back to this breaking the phalanx. Now remember, 1997, a few years back, one of the things he wrote in this book was, he said, technical organizations that have not lived and trained together before they deploy cannot be transformed overnight on the basis of a single exercise or a few into a fighting force that will stand up to future adversaries. Folks, it's right here. It's black and white. This information is out there. Now, Doug is a really smart guy. Obviously, he stands above most, but that's not, you don't need a PhD in physioscientist or something to figure that stuff out. All you got to do is just know how training is conducted. Just have studied warfare over the decades and the centuries even, because mankind is still the same person, and the same things that train the Napoleonic armies are the same things that are necessary to train today's armies in terms of how things are done and how long it takes and how the mentality works on that. But we still don't want to listen to people who have done it. And our leaders today still want to cling to preferences instead of realities on the ground. The last thing kind of that summed up Zelensky's view there, he has 3 particular views on what he thinks should happen. One is they create a system to provide our armed forces with high-tech assets, introducing a new philosophy of training and warfare, which takes account restrictions in assets and how they can be deployed, and mastering new combat capabilities as soon as possible. Folks, that's not going to happen I mean, go get Doug's books and read them so you can get all the details and understand for yourself, especially that margin of victory. That looks at 5 different battles throughout history, to include the Desert Storm fight that he and I both fought in. And it explains to you how each of those things turned into success and how close the title of the book, Margin of Victory, how close it came between victory and failure for the different sides. And all of it was based on what they had done before. Everything that book shows, and just any common sense reading of history and military history, leads you to the conclusion that if you're not prepared before and you have suffered horrible casualties, you're not going to suddenly get it under fire when the other side is continuing to ramp up its capabilities as well. Now, listen, I understand Zaluzhny's position here. He's still fighting a war, at least as of the moment. He's still the commanding general, so he's trying to do what he can. But what this should tell our senior leaders, political as well as military, is that there is no rational path for a Ukrainian success. There is no viable plan, no formation, no new technology that's going to reverse what has happened in the last 2 years. That being the case, it makes no sense at all to put a bunch of American money behind something that won't succeed. And it seems like some in the United States Congress are starting to get this, because here's what the Speaker of the House said when he's asked why they haven't given a lot of money yet to Congress, to Ukraine.
What the Biden administration seems to be asking for is billions of additional dollars with no appropriate oversight, no clear strategy to win, and none of the answers that I think the American people are owed. I have also made very clear from day one that our first condition on any national security supplemental spending package is about our own national security first. The border is an absolute catastrophe.
He's right. Look, the Americans, it's odd that you have to say this out loud, but American government is supposed to take care of our country first, and then where it makes sense, we'll also help others out there. But his first part is even more to the point here. There is no strategy for victory. There is no a plan that's going to end up with something benefiting our country. And there's nothing, as all of this has shown you here, that's going to change the reality on the battlefield. Now, why should I give $60 billion of your dollars that you provide the government through your taxes to a country that cannot succeed? All you're going to be doing is doing what we did in Afghanistan, especially for like the last decade. Every year we put tens of billions of dollars into something that never had a chance militarily to win, until finally it became so rotten and so corrupt it literally collapsed. That's, in my view, the most likely outcome of the situation here, that even if they give some money to them, it's not going to make any difference. The die is cast. The outcome is clear. And if we keep giving our money, it may delay the outcome. But at some point, I think you're going to see the same thing, where at some moment, the Ukrainian army will just collapse, if not politically, because there's all kinds of problems in the domestic politics between the senior political leaders and the military leaders that are squabbling and fighting back and forth. And that's certainly no good trend that's going to show success. But we need to do what makes sense, what's rational, what people like Doug Macgregor have been talking about for decades, laying it out in very stark, clear ways, why things work the way they do, how they're likely to come out. Look, it's almost as though Doug, especially in that 2017 piece, predicted the future. It said exactly what the next war would be like. And it has worked out almost verbatim the way he wrote. He was actually projecting future war, and he was saying if the U.S. was involved, these things would happen. But you just exchanged the word U.S. for Ukraine, and that's what happened. I mean, you read it for yourself there. You saw it on the screen. That's what the truth is. So what now is going to be facing our country is, do we give into more emotion and say, okay, well, Zaluzhny is asking for more help. Zelensky's asking for more money. Let's give it to him, even though it's not going to make any difference. Or are we going to say, hey, it's time to do something different here. It's time to let reality and truth get into what we're doing here, so that we have a shot at creating an outcome that's actually beneficial to America. And that outcome right now, the best thing we can hope for is to get this war tied off as soon as possible, stop the killing of the innocent Ukrainian people, stop the pointless slaughter of their manpower that they're going to need to go to establish their future, and to stop wasting American money and throwing American arms in, that we may end up needing our own self because our national security is weakened because of all of these things we're doing. It's time to reverse all of those things. And that is your deep dive for today. We thank Doug Macgregor for all these books that he's written, and I hope that we have him on again. I don't think next week he's traveling, but you can sure count on it. We'll have him back as soon as he's back in town, because you definitely want to hear it from the horse's mouth, especially if things continue to deteriorate here in both the Ukraine-Russia war as well as in the Middle East. And like I said at the start, apparently B-52s are in the air, so keep watching this channel because there's probably a lot of breaking news coming, possibly even later tonight. Thanks for this show. Please like and subscribe. Pass on to your friends because, folks, here at this channel, we are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth, no matter what it is, whether anybody likes it or not. This is what the truth you need to know. Thanks, and we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.